Chris Martin here with Free Effects Tutorials, and today we're going to use the new advanced render settings in Cinema 4D R15 to put together this little composite right here. So we're going to be using some of the new presets that they have in R15 as well as the physical camera to get our blur, or I should say our shallow depth of field here between the cars. And then we're going to take this into After Effects and do a little compositing work, do a little color correction, and blur out our background as well. Okay? Now, this car I got online from here. So if you want to get this car, you can grab it here at grabcad.com. And this is by Merrick, and I'm probably going to destroy this last name, Rybacki. I hope that I didn't tear it up too bad, but anyway, Merrick, I think, is the guy. And if you want to download this car, you can go right here and download that, and you can be working with the same car that I am. Now, when I downloaded it, I got rid of all of the materials that he had on it because I believe he was working in V-Ray. So we took all of these off, and I went back and put on my own materials. Something that I do want to show you, if you're going to be doing that same thing, is I started out with the car paint material. And you just go in here, grab car paint. And you can really start out with any of these. I think I started out with a glossy champagne. Let me just open that up. And a friend of mine that knows a lot more about these materials than I do told me that these have been around for quite some time, so there are a few changes that you may want to make just to make these work a little bit better. One of them is in the reflection channel. Take the mix mode to normal. If we go into the Fresnel, we can click on physical here, and we can put our own numbers in here based on these presets. And you can't see this here, but I think that I went with plexiglass. Actually, you know what? I took this to 1.3 for that reflection channel. And you can just play with this so that you get what you want. But that was a huge, or I should say, that made a huge difference in the way these materials looked when they were in the scene. I also went to the diffusion channel and took this number up to about 50%. So 51. I turned on effect reflection. And let's just come back down here to reflection again. I took the blurriness to about 3. Oh, and in the last thing, I actually changed the color of mine just a little bit. So I took this down to something a little darker gray. But that was about it. So those are the changes that I made in the car paint material. All right. I can go ahead and get rid of that because I've already got my car paint material on here. Go ahead and get this back up here. Next thing I'm going to do is go ahead and put a background object in here. And let me grab a new material and find my background. Let's turn off specular, go to color. There's my background. Actually, that's not it. Let's go to right there. Open that up. That looks good. Put that on our background. Let's go ahead and put a camera in the scene. And I happen to know that this is 1200 by 675. That looks a little better. Let's go ahead and try to sort of get this where we're going to want it. Maybe something like that. That's a good place to start. It's probably a good time to go ahead and save. Now let's go ahead and throw a plane in the scene. We're going to use this as our shadow catcher. We're going to make that pretty big. Let's go to another view so we can sort of pull that down. Get that right below our tires there. Maybe like that. I'm going to create another material. Just have this be a matte gray. Something like that. Go ahead and throw that onto my plane or shadow catcher. There we go. Let's go ahead and put a sky object in our scene. And let's go and find a HDRI image. Let's go to the prime and we'll go to materials, HDRI. Just pick whatever you want here. I'm going to grab this one. Go ahead and put that onto my sky. I'm going to right click here. I'm going to grab a compositing tag, and I don't want this to be seen by camera, but I want to make sure that I'm going to turn on the compositing background and compositing background for HDR maps. Let's go ahead and do a quick render here. And that looks totally wrong because this should be on my shadow catcher. I can turn this back on, put another compositing tag over here and turn that off. Let's render that again. Okay. So that's looking a little bit better. What we need to do now is go ahead and turn on our GI. So let's go over here. And for effect, let's turn on ambient occlusion and global illumination. Now, for my global illumination, I'm going to grab a preset. And let's go ahead and try exterior preview and just leave everything else the way it is. And do another render. And now we're starting to get something a little more like what we would expect. Okay. Now at the moment the car is looking very blue, and that's because of the HDR image that I've got over here. I'm going to grab another image, something like that. Let's try this one and see what we get there. Let's do another quick render. Okay. That is totally reflective. Let's go ahead and try one more. Go down here and just look at these. I'm going to try this just to get something that looks a little different. And I think I'm going to go ahead and put a little blur here. Something like that. Do a quick render. Okay, I'm starting to like that a little bit more. Let's go ahead and try one more. Let me try this. Put that on there. Okay, well, let's see what else we can change that's going to get this to looking a little bit better than what we have here. I'm going to try an image from the Visualize pack and see if that looks a little bit better to me. I'm going to try this one. Put that up there. Let's go ahead and blur this a little bit as well. Alright. Do a quick render. Okay, now that's starting to look right. Alright, I like that. So as you can see, the HDR image that you use can have a huge effect on the way your model is going to look. But I think all in all, that looks pretty good. Okay, so let's go ahead and duplicate this. I'm just going to control drag to duplicate it. Call this one black. And I'm going to just spin that around a little bit. Maybe something like that. Pull that over. Let's see, over there. Where do we want this exactly? Just push it over here. We'll spin it around. Just get it however you want it, obviously. Back. Probably going to just make this a little smaller as well. And make sure that that car is sitting on the floor as well. And I'm going to duplicate my material. That's actually not the one. My car paint material. Let's see. Let's go to the bottom here. And that material is right here. I'm going to duplicate that. I'm just going to turn this one black. Or darker. Maybe not all the way black, but something like that. And we'll just put that over here. Let's go ahead and move our shadow catcher so that it is getting everything like that. Do a quick render. Okay, I think that's a little too small and too far back. Let's go ahead and pull that up a little bit. Let's grab our black car. Maybe a little bit bigger. Pull that. Maybe like that. Again, let's check it over here. Just get it sitting on top. Another quick render. Okay, so I'm going to push that down a little bit more. We can play with this all day, but you kind of get the idea, I'm sure. So I'm just going to take that and push that down just a tad bit. Driving me crazy. There we go. Okay, let's say that's good. I'm going to come over here. I'm going to go from standard renderer to physical renderer. Let's take a look here, and let's go with depth of field. We're going to leave everything else as is. And then I'm going to come over to my camera and look at some of my options here. So, focus object. I want the focus object to be the gray car. I'm going to drag that in there. And if we go up here, we can see that the camera is now focused on that car. So, if we come over to the perspective now and we do a render, we're focused on this car. And we're not really getting any blur over here. And that's what we want. We want this car to be sort of blurred out. So if we come take a look at some of our options that we have here, if we have an f-stop of 8, number one, that's not going to give us much depth of field. We want to go with something much lower, like a 2.8, something like that. And something else that we need to look at is what sort of focal length we have. Right now we have a 36 millimeter. If we go with something that's more telephoto, like this, we're going to get a lot more depth of field. So let's do that. And sort of rework our camera, something more like that. Maybe you can pull back a little bit more. Just see what that looks like. See if we start to get that blur in there. And we are starting to get a little bit more blur. We can take our lens to something much lower, like 1.4. Let's take a look at that. And we are getting slight blur here. You can take this down to unrealistic numbers if you want. You could take this down to something like 0.5. And if we click this and render again, you can start to see it's really, really becoming blurred. Now, this is not a real number. This is nothing that you could use in real photography. So I'm going to go with something like 1.4. If I had a 1.4 telephoto lens, that thing would cost a fortune. But I'm going to go ahead and use that number for this particular scene because I like the amount of blur that I'm getting. You may want to do something a little different. That's up to you. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to do is go ahead and put a couple compositing tags here on the gray car and the black car. I'm going to go to my object buffer, turn on object buffer 1 for the gray car, object buffer 2 for the black car. I'm going to come up to multipass, turn that on, and I'm going to dump in here an RGBA image and 2 object buffers and make sure I change 1 to 1 and 1 to 2. Alright. Anti-aliasing is disabled because we are using the global illumination. Let's go ahead and change this to exterior physical sky. Actually, HDR. Let's go ahead and keep that there. Okay. Now, just an FYI on the ambient occlusion and on the global illumination, you have cache tabs here, so you can enable the cache. And if you are doing multiple renders and you like what you get and you don't want it to have to continue to re-render that every time, you can have this auto load turned on. Same thing with your global illumination. You can go to the cache files and you can have auto load and skip pre-pass if present. Okay, you can also auto load your radiosity maps. So I'll go ahead and turn those on. Do a file save. I am going to save these out. And I'm going to call one of these render. And I'll do another one. I'll call this one multi for multi-pass. I'm going to go ahead and turn on my compositing. The application is going to be After Effects. And we'll save that file. That's fine. Output, current frame. And I think that's about it. So we'll go ahead and we'll render this out, and then we'll head on over to After Effects. Okay, so just an FYI, I did a few renders that came out not so good looking. So this is what I ended up changing it to. So I have the primary method, irradiance cache, and then light mapping for the secondary method. I went 64 maximum depth. And for the light mapping, I changed the count to 20,000, and that seemed to come out pretty good. Okay. Okay, so we're in After Effects. Let me go ahead and double click here, and let's pull in our Rally AEC file. Go ahead and click on here, and let's take a look at what we got. Got our cars in here. Looks pretty good. I'm going to go ahead and delete this. Double click, pull in my Rally 0020.tiff, import, ignore, and pull that down. Okay, now right now you'll notice that we have some shadow issues right here. So what I'm going to do is come over to File, Project Settings, and I want to make sure I'm using 16 bits per channel, sRGB, and linearize working space. That should be checked. Alright, let's go ahead and click OK. And then this will sort of fill in a little bit better. The next thing I want to do is go ahead and separate these cars out. So I'm going to take this, I'm going to drag it into a new comp. And I'm going to grab one of my object buffers, pull it in here, and change that to Luma Matte. So now I've got this gray car separated. I'm going to go ahead and call that, or rename that 1. And I'll duplicate that, Control D, open up number 2, and with the object buffer 1 selected, I'll grab object buffer 2, hold Alt or Option down, and just replace that. So now I've got the second car separated out. Go ahead and close these down. Back to my Rally. I can get rid of this camera now. Don't need it anymore. I'm going to take these two comps, pull them in here. Okay. And now we've got these separated out. So we can come over here and maybe go ahead and put a curves adjustment on our background and just sort of get this to your liking. I'm going to pull it down like this. Just going to play around with it until I get something that I like. Pull the green maybe a little out like that. Push my blue up. Okay, kind of like that. Looks nice. I also want to go ahead and add a hue saturation layer to this. So I'll grab that, pop that on there, and just pull my master saturation up a bit. Next thing I want to do is come back here. I'm going to right click, go to New. Let's go to right here where I can see. I'm going to grab an adjustment layer. And I want to put a camera lens blur on my adjustment layer. And that just sort of blurs out the whole thing. I want to come back here and go back to my folder and grab a gradient that I created in Photoshop and just import that. And it's just a black to white gradient. And I'm going to take that and I'm going to pull that into my comp. I'm going to turn that off and I'm going to use that with my lens blur. So I'm going to use it as the blur map. So I'll just select that. And right now it's blurring from the bottom to the top. I'm just going to invert that. And now you can see that it doesn't have any blur here at the bottom and it blurs as it goes up to the top. The last thing I want to do here is just right click, go to New, Solid. I want to put a black solid on top of this. I'm going to grab my pen tool and just do a little outline here, whatever you want to do. I'm going to come over here, hit M for mask, turn that on to subtract mode. I want to hit F for feather, feather that out quite a bit. Something like that. And hit T for opacity. Then we can kind of take that down. Okay. So that is about it. And that brings us to the end of the tutorial. I hope you enjoyed this on how to use some of the new advanced render settings in Cinema 4D R15. My name is Chris Martin with FreeFX Tutorials. I'll see you next time.